This episode of Tales from the Lot is sponsored by ShakedownT-shirts.com with unique lot-style T-shirts, license plate frames, coffee mugs, and all sorts of things for Grateful Dead, Fish, Zappa, Panic, and more. ShakedownT-shirts.com, where all U.S. orders over $35 ship free. And just for Tales from the Lot listeners, use the code LOT20 for 20% off of any order. That's LOT20. Tales from the Lot, episode 0204. Too many shows and too little time. My guest Paul Kjellberg is here to talk about the May 90 shows at Cal State in Carson, California. Here we go. Hi, welcome to Tales from the Lot. This is Will. My guest today is Paul Kjellberg. We're here to talk about the 5.5 and 5.6 90 shows at Cal State.
You got it, Will.
How's it going, Paul?
It's going awesome, man. I was excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. And to all you folks listening, you could be just like Paul. So send me an email. How did you get to the Grateful Dead? I mean, so you were talking a little bit before that you'd moved around a little bit. And so did you, do you have family that introduced you to it or friends, or how did that work? And what were you into growing up musically?
You know, I grew up in Minnesota and, classic 70s stuff throughout, my younger days with Kiss and Boston, Kansas, all the classics. We moved out to rural Minnesota when I was just getting into high school. So that was kind of wild. I got into a whole new group of friends and really quite quickly got into that mid-'80s skateboarding scene and really got into a lot of, punk rock stuff. I love Black Flag. I love, Sonic Youth, a lot of...
My mind went.
Yeah, just got super into like SST Records and basically anything. Meat Puppets are still top 3 band for me, for sure. But also, being out in the country, you'd go to a lot of parties and it was always Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Grateful Dead and, Boston. I mean, you name it, the whole playlist at a high school party and, the rural areas in the 80s. Totally. So, yeah, it was just really kind of one of the bands that I liked.
Cool. So they came through, where were they coming through? I don't remember if they played in Minnesota at that time. Did you go to like Chicago, or did they come through that area through Minneapolis? The Dead?
Well, it's funny that the year I graduated in 87, I had a chance to see him. It was that Dylan and the Dead tour, and they were playing at the Metrodome. But the rub was Pink Floyd was playing at the Metrodome right about the same time. And that was my go-to band at the time was Pink Floyd. Just loved everything about Pink Floyd. So we, with the financial situation of an 18-year-old, my friends and I had to pick one. And we opted for Pink Floyd, which in retrospect, I heard the sound was terrible at that Dylan and the Dead show. So it would have been great to see the Dead in 87. But it was cool to see the Roger Waters list. Pink Floyd was a pretty rad show to see. So that was the choice there.
Was that Division Bell? Was that the tour that was?
Momentary Lapse of Reason.
Momentary. Oh, okay.
I
saw him on the Division Bell tour, and it was at the Hoosier Dome. Okay. So I was going to comment that the sound in the Hoosier Dome was bad. Like it was just like it was a huge echoey chamber. And it did. I mean, I was glad to see them, the Roger Waterless Pink Floyd, but unfortunately, it was in a huge football stadium in Columbus.
I know.
Hopefully the Metrodome was better up there.
But I was getting into like other kinds of psychedelic rock, and I think reading magazines, I was getting more and more intrigued by the Dead at the time. I really only had like Skeletons from the Closet. I think I had. At that time I had In the Dark, I had Working Man's Dead, just a smattering of cassettes at the time. But coinciding with that, I decided, college wasn't happening for me at the time. I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't doing well. And kind of like what I told you, I knew some relatives down in Arizona, and I took kind of ducked out and moved down there for the winter in 88. So pretty much right after graduating and making a brief foray into college, headed down to Arizona and decided, I don't know how I tracked it down, but I saw they were playing at Long Beach Arena on 12/9/88. And I didn't really know anybody. I maybe had a few people that I knew in passing, some skateboard friends, but I just decided to go for it. And I actually went by myself, which was pretty wild. An 8-hour drive, driving my grandpa's car, pretty dicey,
Yeah.
by myself.
Going
And
by yourself
yeah, I did. I did it. I was,
to
I
your
don't know.
first Grateful
I
Dead
was
show.
like, what's that?
To your first Grateful Dead show.
Yes, I know. I always hear people talking about their older brother or their older sister or their uncle. And I was like,
Yes,
I kind of just had to go for it on my own.
that's immersion, right? Is that what they call it? Like immersion.
And it
Yeah, you didn't have
was too.
anybody
I
to
had a
ask. Yeah.
ticket. I got a ticket. I was ready to go. I was raring to go. I think I walked into like J.C. Penney's, and they used to have those ticket booths, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
got a ticket. I didn't know the routine, so I got a ticket for one night, the first night. I didn't realize you go to all the nights at that point. you know.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I took off. I cruised out there, no plans, no nothing. Just going to make 8 hours to the show in Long Beach and see what happened after that. And man, I tell you, it was like pulling into Shangri-La. I felt like that was my people. It was so funny. It was just, I think we all kind of experienced that because, not a lot of that in rural Minnesota in the 80s. And, it's kind of like what Jerry said so well. It was kind of a lame time to be growing up in the 80s. And it was just suddenly, I kind of felt like I broke out of that and, wandered around the parking lot and, chatting with people and just had a great time. And I surprisingly, unlike a lot of the shows I saw, I actually remember it really well. Sitting on Brent's side, like up in the first little balcony, really great seats. I think I was even in the first row, like looking over the rail, just right down at Brent's keyboards, and just loved
Mhm.
the whole show. Had a blast, and walked out and drove back to Arizona. So it was kind of a lot of driving, but well worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. It just blows my mind that because like you said, everybody has a friend or a brother or whoever it was that got them into it and took them to the shows, and then you had that person to be like, what are they talking about and why are they doing that and what does that mean, and because I had a lot of questions, also being from the Midwest in the 80s, and luckily I had somebody
Yeah.
with me who had been there before, so yeah, I just can't even imagine going in there without that
It,
person and just taking it all in, like, wow.
And I've been asked, like, because my friends know that story, and it's like, wow, did you go to a lot of Grateful Dead shows by yourself? And I say, no, 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 not at all. I think I went to one other show at the LA Sports Arena by myself in like '93 because I was visiting somebody and they were not into the Dead. So I was like, well, I'm going to go to the show. But that was it, just two shows, because of course it is a lot of fun to go with friends and whatnot. So
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. So, okay, so that was 88.
yep, 12/9/88. That was my first show. I had
Megadeth.
roped several of my Arizona friends, and I had dragged one friend to see the Irvine Meadows shows in '89, and I dragged another friend of mine, Ed, out to the LA Forum, and then he was going to come out with me to these Cal State shows. So he was sort of getting in the loop, but I'd say I think this was my 8th and ninth show.
Hmm.
Went back to Minnesota the previous summer just to spend the summer, and man, another great set of shows that we could talk about another time was Alpine Valley
Well, we can
'89.
talk about it right now.
Well, I
I'd
mean,
love to hear about it.
those were so fantastic, and that was the first shows where I realized, oh, you got to go to all the shows, because we were going to one show here, one show there. And it was the first time, driving in a Volkswagen bus out to a show and camping all weekend. And of course, we've all probably seen Downhill from Here, the video.
Hmm.
Just
Right.
really, really phenomenal shows. And at this point, I'm thinking, man, every show is unbelievable. This is the Dead. It's like, yeah, it was. It seemed like every show was a banger.
Yeah. they, and they were for the most part, I feel like,
I
especially if you're
think I
there.
think at
There's a
that point, yeah.
Yeah, they were still cooking. I mean, I think the momentum maybe stopped a little bit with Brent, but
Absolutely.
and at that point, I felt, they were. I, after that, Jerry didn't really have somebody that drove him, that really lit a fire under him like Brent did. I feel like maybe
I
Bruce did
feel like maybe
occasionally, but
Hornsby gave him a little bit of spark kind of in that 91. 91 was great. That's a year I saw like so many really, really like the shows got really long again, like 3.5, 4 hour shows. But that was
that's when I
short
first saw
lived.
him
Yeah.
with
Yeah. I
Hornsby.
mean, that was fantastic. We did pretty much the whole summer tour in 91, and they were playing some cool venues like Sandstone and Pine Knob, and every show was great. I thought they were really clicking along well for a while there.
I agree. Yeah, the Soul one I saw at Deer Creek in '91, my first one. It was my first one. So what can I say? But it was awesome. But in hindsight, listening back to the tapes, it was a pretty tight one. A good Sugar Mag and uh, Scarlet Fire, and like everything was just good about it. There was
Yeah,
the
no.
standing on the moon. I think is what hooked me. Like it was just a party all day long, and everything was fun. And then standing on the moon happened. And I was like, oh, that too. Like I didn't realize that there was going to be this big, powerful moment in the show that
Yeah.
like a Jerry
And
Ballard tends to be.
it seemed like they'd always drag out a great standing on the moon when it was like a moonlit night, and it was just the timing of it was always pretty epic. Like Alpine
Yeah.
Valley, there was a really good one if I recall. I mean, just right up there with Morning Dew. Is like a really good kind of bring it down the
Oh yeah.
home stretch song for sure.
Any one of those. I mean, for me, they're all equally awesome. Whether it's Stella Blue or any one of those. Even what was the last one? Days Between. There that one has its moments sometimes.
Oh man, I mean, talk about the poignant lyrics too. I mean, holy cow.
Okay, so I'm gonna flip back on my dead base here. I was looking at that Alpine Valley show you were talking about.
Oh yeah.
But
Sorry, I didn't
the
mean to get you off track.
oh no, it's okay because I like as we talk about it, I like to know what we're talking about just to see
Yeah.
like because I might check it and go back and listen to it later for whatever reason. But
Well, I think that the 17th is the one that people talk about the most, I think, but all 3 nights were pretty awesome.
gotcha. I'll just check them all out. I've got plenty of time. I've got the rest of my life.
That there's too many shows, too little time, Will.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I try to fit them all in, but as I said, I just make a list and sort of check them off, and I get tons of recommendations from talking to people. So it's a good
Nice.
list, but they're always good shows. So I don't waste my time with anything that
You can't go wrong, man. I've got
Yeah, I
an
don't know.
affinity for 90s Dead, and I mean, I suppose a lot of people don't prefer that, but I mean, I think you can always find a good show in every year. So
I agree. I mean, really, 100%. I'm not a huge fan, obviously, for obvious reasons of like the summer '95. I felt like,
mhm.
uh, obviously things were kind of fizzled out at that point. But I think everything up to even spring of '95.
Hmm.
But yeah, after that it was kind of downhill, obviously. But I agree with you. The '90s are just as good for different sorts of reasons. I think them being able to play with the new toys, playing with MIDI sounds, and just doing new
Mhm.
things with the songs was cool. Um, you know, whether you like that or
Agreed.
not.
My last shows were McNichols Arena, December '94, and they were great. I'm so glad that was kind of the ones that I just, unbeknownst to me, I was certainly planning on going to more shows, but the scene was getting a little weird, and it's kind of different when you're 25 versus when you're 20. You have to kind of start to look at, do I want to go back to college? What do I want to do? And so the shows were
Mhm.
ramping down, and I was just trying to pick. I lived in Colorado, so it was just right up the road. And so yeah, I mean, I'm super happy that the last shows I saw, Jerry was rocking. The set lists were great, so I never had any complaints at all.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that. I love '90s shows. I put them on as much as '70s shows or
Yeah,
any '80s shows or anything else. Really, I was sort of equally balanced, I guess.
me
Uh,
too. Yep, that's good.
yeah, and it's and what a difference in one band from like the Pigpen era to what they were in 94 and 95.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible. Like I'd have to say 74 is probably my favorite year, like maybe a lot of deadheads, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I threw on like a 76 where Jerry's playing that Travis Bean guitar, and the tone was it's so great, and it's so interesting to think, oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
barely 2 years later and the sound is completely different.
Yeah.
But that's what keeps it intriguing.
Yeah, and that's what keeps them together. Probably is just keeping it fresh and new stuff, new toys, new songs, new
Hmm.
just keeping it going. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to keep going. I'm sure, like any kind of long term relationship with that many people.
Man, it's unbelievable. Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah, no doubt. We'll get up to these 5.90 shows, and I'm going to guess, based on the races on that was Derby Day.
Yeah, yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, that was
Probably.
just a couple days ago
Yeah.
here. My buddies at work get so tired of me talking Grateful Dead. I said, "Hey guys, yeah, it's 5-5. It's 32 years ago today. I was heading in." They're like, "Okay, another dead story from Paul." But anyway, yeah, it's amazing that yeah, Kentucky Derby weekend. My only race is
Mhm.
on. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it, man, but the Phil bass on it is just slamming. He just rocks right into it, and
Yeah.
it's a good representation of how the show sounded. They were extremely loud and extremely crisp. I mean, not washed out. It probably was the two best sounding shows that I saw, especially outdoors. It's just the sound system was excellent, and we were kind of
Hmm.
posted up right by the soundboard. So maybe it was we were just in the right spot, but I did walk around and it sounded great everywhere. So,
Yeah, I listened to it on archive because I was sort of driving around and
oh
doing some
yeah,
things as I was listening to both of these shows, and the copies on there are definitely good, and Phil was out front. You could definitely hear him
yeah,
throughout the whole time. So yeah, and
oh
everything else
yeah.
too was crystal clear. But if you're a Phil fan, check these out because he's there prominently.
And I gave him a nice tight listen this weekend too. And man, even and Brent, I knew Brent had a great showing. It's really the Phil and Brent show, but I listened a little more closely, and all the stuff that he was doing, like underneath, a whirling dervish, of
Yeah,
motion, with the
right.
keyboards, and that was that I did. Luckily, I mean, I saw Brent's last shows were the next shows that I saw up at Tinley Park,
Hmm.
which was a huge contrast to these because Tinley Park had the nickname Tinny Park because the sound system was so horrible. And all 3 days, the sound was so bad, it was really hard to get into the shows. It's hard to enjoy it when you're fighting to hear it. And I felt like we had lawn seats for those three shows. And, every night it just didn't sound great. So it was quite a
Hmm.
contrast sound wise. And then unfortunately, that was the end of Brent. That was surprising.
Right.
Just when I was really getting into it, that was kind of a sudden shock.
Right. Hmm. Yeah. I, I didn't hop on until a year later, so I missed out on Brent, but definitely wished I would have seen him. He's my favorite keyboard player that they had. I mean, I like
Yeah.
Hornsby a lot, but I think as a long term stay, I think he grew into the position, and I loved his voice and his
Yeah.
playing and his energy and just everything in the way him and Jerry would just go back and forth. You could you could see it on the downhill hill from here video. Those two just pushing each other, and that's what made that
Yep.
era of the band so good, I think.
Great vibe. Yeah, they had a great
For
vibe.
sure.
And I never felt like Vince really, Vince had his back up against the wall the whole time, just getting thrown in there. And I mean, man,
Mm.
I tell you, he gave it the old college try, but his voice just somehow it just didn't seem to fit in very well. And like I say, the guy's a great player. I never had a problem with Vince. I thought it sounded better when Hornsby was in the mix as well.
Hmm.
And then Vince had to use that weird little Casio looking keyboard thing, like up on it just
Yeah.
didn't look cool. I don't know. It just, I felt like he never really got a good chance.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. he did the best he could, and I quite like
Yeah.
Samba in the Rain. So.
You didn't like Samba in the Rain?
No, I do like Samba in the Rain.
I do. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
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 it grew on
yeah.
me. It had that kind of jazzy jamming to it. I thought it sounded pretty cool. The other one, what was it? Way to Go Home, a little more of a
Yeah,
rocker. I mean, that
yeah.
one probably wasn't quite as good. I mean, but not
The fact
bad.
that,
Wasn't
if it was,
terrible.
no, but I think it was just overplayed, because I think they literally did play at every venue, just to get him a song in, and I think there was a point where they were literally playing at every venue Way to Go Home was happening, and it was just, and if it wasn't every, it was
Yeah,
every other at
agreed.
least, and it just, I feel like it was overplayed. If it wouldn't have been played quite so much, it wouldn't have got so much hate. Maybe, I don't know. Okay, so Carson, California, at Cal State. Did you have tickets both nights?
Yeah, man. I actually, I for inspiration, I dug them out of the old ticket drawer, so I still have the stubs there from those
Nice.
shows. $22. That's crazy, right?
$22. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love how it says includes the $1.50 for parking. $1.50. Like, really? Okay.
Wow. Nice.
Now it's like 15
Nice.
bucks. You're lucky.
Right. Yeah, that's a bargain.
Yeah, no
Wow.
kidding.
So you drove up there, and did you have a crew with you, or
I
from what I've
brought,
seen?
I think we got sidetracked again talking other shows, which is pretty
Yeah,
common.
it
But
happens.
yeah, my buddy Ed and I, it was 2 o'clock shows. So we left. I remember we left like bright and early from Phoenix to cruise out to LA. Had tickets again, and super, super excited. I'm just at this point, eighth and ninth show, every show I'm just getting more excited for. And this was just a great weekend. The whole thing, it just seemed like one of these weird synchronicity situations, because we get out there and we pull in, and you're in this dusty, grassy field for parking. And of course, they're waving you into an organized row. So, we barely hop out. And me and Ed, we're like, well, we got time for one beer, and we pretty much have to head in. So we crack a beer, and coming up from our left-hand side is Bill Graham on a motorcycle. And I knew who he was, and I'm like, holy cow, this is Bill Graham's coming up, and I'm just blown away. I had read several Dead books at this point, and I knew exactly who he was. Ed, I don't think Ed knew, so he was probably wondering what was going on. But he rides up, and he just had the biggest smile, and he said, "Hey, fellas," I'm sure we had the biggest smile, and he's like, let's have you guys put those beers in cups if you could. And I'm like, yeah, Bill, for sure, for sure. We got them in cups. And he said, all right, have a great time. And on he went down the road. I've told, if I had $1 for every time I've told people I met Bill Graham, I'd be pretty rich.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a
So,
great way to start a day, though, when you just roll out of your car,
oh,
and Bill Graham comes up and greets you with some friendly advice.
yeah. And I mean, you hear these gruff, tough stories of Bill Graham, but he loved the Deadheads. I mean, I think he just loved the Dead, and he loved the Deadheads.
Mhm.
And he was just, he was beaming ear to ear. He's trying to run a good show because, I mean, of course, at that time, they're getting booted from a lot of venues. So
Mhm.
he's trying to, put it together, but he was having a great time. And, rolling along on that motorcycle through the dirty parking lot. He was just loving it.
Okay, so he rides off into the sunset. So that it's
Yeah,
a 2 p.m. start. That's early.
2
Was
p.m.
there an opener? Or was there an
No,
opener,
you're
or?
in, you're rolling. I mean, we just drove 8 hours. We had a little bag of some psilocybin, and we partook of that with our beers and started walking in. And
Mhm.
we're heading in, and we had from what I recall, I felt like we waited around a while. I think we got in there about 45 minutes early and got a really, really good spot just right to the right of the soundboard. I don't know if you saw any pictures of the show, Will, but it's just basically a huge soccer field. So it's just a giant
Mhm.
rectangle with the stage at one end. I've heard people say they wanted to replace Laguna Seca with the Carson venue because I think the Laguna Seca thing was on the shelf at that point. But So I think it was pretty similar to that. Just pretty massive crowd, massive sound system. Um, the weird thing was, as we're walking in, and I think just as we're getting to our spot, there's this guy, and I noticed he's dressed like in this wizard garb with like a hat and a cape. And I look over, and it's hot. It's got to be getting close to 100 degrees, and I doubt there was any hydration going on either Ed or I's part at this point, And I see Ed taking a big swig of this guy's water vessel. It was like a wine satchel, one of those things that a wizard would have, I guess. And I look, and I thought immediately in my head, I'm like, oh boy, that's not a good idea. And I kind of grabbed Ed a little bit. And I said, hey man, what was that? He's like, oh, it's just juice. I'm really thirsty. And the light bulbs are going on, and I'm thinking, oh no, this might be a problem. And sure enough, and I don't know if it was the mushrooms or if it was the wizard. I told him, dude, don't drink anything from a wizard. That's a bad idea at a dead show.
First of all.
Yeah. And it's getting close to showtime, and I notice Ed's behavior is getting like more and more erratic. And he's starting to bump into people, and I'm thinking, oh boy, the show's about to start. And, Ed's starting to lose it a little bit here. And, we were both, I would say fairly experienced voyagers at that point. We're 21, right. You've had some experiences, but he was starting to go off the rails a little bit. And I remember somebody by us, there must have been some other people having issues because they directed us, and I think it was like a wavy gravy, like medical tent, just like immediately to my right between the soundboard and the side of the field. And this person said, let's bring him over to the tent because he might start having a problem here. So we walk him over, and at this point the show's starting, and it's let the good times roll. And I wasn't, at this point, I'm not going to let anything get in my way, including maybe Ed having a little bit of a, wizard dose or whatever happened, So right. I brought him over there, and somebody that seemed like it was a good spot, and people were, friendly, and they knew exactly what to do. So I walked the 30 yards back to my, blanket, which was just sitting in the exact spot, and right in time for that race is on to come slamming in. And then my favorite, trio of that Help Slip Franklin's comes knocking in after that. And that was my first one of Help Slip Franklin's. And I was just rocking. For the rest of the show, having a great time. Luckily, Ed, before the second set, he comes wandering back, and he had regained his senses. So he was able to enjoy the rest of the show with me, and he was fine. So luckily it was crisis averted at that point.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, that was a solid first set. You got bonus songs sort of before the Help Slip opener, and the Queen Jane. I love that song. Mexicali and Me and My Uncle, and a Saturday Night first set closer. Awesome.
You don't have to worry about that being the encore.
Exactly. Yeah, you got that out of the way, and got a touch of gray instead, but that's okay.
And that's great. Yeah, that was fine. I thought, the first sets, man, both of these 2 days, I actually prefer, if you ask me which sets do I listen to the most, the first sets from both days, which is really most of us are going for the second set usually, but, Loser and Loose Lucy in the second set, it was just very, very long shows too. And then that second day, they finished up the first set with that Victim or the Crime into Foolish Heart with a lot of good jamming. So they were getting into it, but I've heard a lot of stories, and watching the show there, I saw Bill Walton up on the stage. You couldn't miss him. But reading a lot of articles, there was a lot of like Grateful Dead luminaries there. Like Timothy Leary was there. Terrence McKenna was there. I've read that Owsley was there. It was kind of a who's who of, the LA, everybody's coming out for the LA shows to see these Dead shows. And of course, this is one of those, legendary shows where supposedly the band all dosed together, one of those shows. This was when the Brotherhood was back, and so the shows are a little sizzling, a little bit off the rails. I've read some complaints that they weren't as tight as the Great Spring Tour 90, etc., which was a great tour.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of like that off the rails energy of these shows. So in my mind, we like to believe that, oh yeah, it was the Brotherhood was back. They got a good dose from either Leary or Owsley.
Yeah. You know what I noticed looking at the set list of both these, I mean, I listened to them, but didn't really sink in as much, but there's a lot of just very like unique set list choices, with
Yeah.
Saturday night in the first set, the race is on, throwing that in there, but specifically like the wait in the middle of the second set, the second night, and blow away after that. Just all kinds of interesting choices that make for good shows, I say.
I thought so too. Really good, good version of the wait too. I mean, it's kind of a little. I just listened to that today actually, and it's a little heart wrenching with that Brent verse. It's just it's kind of like it's a poignant verse that is his verse to sing now that we know what happened not that long after that. So, but yeah, the weight and blow. This was like heavy on the Brent. I mean, we got blow away in the second set. That was a pretty epic. Oh yeah, and that's what I was going to mention. The second day too. The keyboard solo in Samson and Delilah, phenomenal. And I just remember that this whole weekend, the sound was so great. And that keyboard solo, I felt like it was blowing me backwards. It was probably just one of those weird things. But I'm leaning, it was just propelling off the stage. And
like
I just can't talk
guy.
enough on how clear these shows were. What's that?
You were like the Max L guy from the commercial.
Exactly. That's what I felt like. Yeah, no, it sounded awesome. I mean, it was just the sound system was great. Brent sounded really, really good the whole time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was fun. It was a great weekend. Ed survived, so that was a plus.
Good, he pulled through. And you're okay. So you're talking about kind of preferring the first sets, and I think after once Vince got there, I felt like the first sets had more variety as far as song choices, whereas the second sets in 91, 92, specifically like 93, 94 became where you pretty much knew what was going to happen second set. But the first set were sort of more varied, and they weren't jamming as much or whatever, but you could just different songs and just not as predictable. They kind of got a little predictable on the second sets. I felt like as they went through the 90s a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think Vince was integral in, kind of bringing back a few songs. Like he wanted to bring back "Here Comes Sunshine." He wanted to do that "Tomorrow Never Knows" little combo that they like to do a few times. And I think he was the impetus to try and get the Unbroken Chain back too. So he was trying to be a little more adventurous when maybe some of the other guys were getting a little stagnant.
Yeah. So after these shows, how many did you see altogether?
I was looking at my stubs, and I've got 45 ticket stubs, but I know I don't have all of them. So I'd say probably more than 45, but less than 50. And then I only got one Jerry band show in, which that's a big, I just was so much more into the Dead. I love Jerry and his guitar, just phenomenal. But I just like the more psychedelic Grateful Dead stuff than the gospel and blues oriented Garcia band. Now I listen to every bit as much Garcia band as I do Grateful Dead. But I saw we went to the Eel River 91. So if you're going to only go to one, that was probably a good one to hit.
Yeah.
Right before we saw the 3 Cal Expo and the 3 Shoreline shows, just like a week later. Nice. So that was a fun little trip with some cool venues. Yeah. You got me excited to listen to some Jerry band now. That's great.
Yeah, for sure. I was just listening to last night. Yesterday I got a copy of the Keystone with Merle and Jerry on vinyl.
Oh, did you get the new one?
This was like
74.
No, this one's from 73, and it's like on some weird label called no, it's on Fantasy label. So it was pressed at the time. Maybe it was pressed in 74.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like an old school bootleg or something. I don't know where it came from some obscure record label in the early 70s, but I found it at my local record store. And
Oh,
the
cool.
records are like just beautiful. The cover's a little beat, but the records are beautiful and sound great. So, uh, yeah,
Good
I love
find.
that. Yeah, that Merle Jerry thing is so good when they're
Oh
like
yeah.
finders keepers and
The
I've
the
been digging
set
into Jerry
list,
lately.
some awesome varied set lists on those early '70s Jerry band. That was the only complaint. Is a lot of those '80s and '90s, you knew you were gonna get Deal to close the first set. There was a little
Mm-hmm.
formulaic. Of course, still improvising within the songs, but the set lists weren't super varied.
Yeah. The way you do the things you do, and that's what love will do for you, and kind of that '90s
Yeah,
Jerry band thing. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
man, I listened to a Mission in the Rain just a couple days ago, and wow, that's I don't know why the Dead didn't do that a little more often. I think they just did it once, maybe only one time in '76. But boy, that
Mm-hmm.
that could have been another one of those like second set slot, type of songs after Drums in
For
Space.
sure. And then you said you were at Tinley Park, and then did you go see shows pretty quickly, or how
Actually,
was
yeah,
how
I
long was it?
saw. We went to Vince's first shows. This was really when I was generating steam. I saw a ton of shows. Most of those 45 shows were 90 and 91. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we went right out to Richfield, and I saw Vince's first shows, and then we went out. And if I remember correctly, I think it was the Philly Spectrum after that, and that's when Bruce started playing with them. So
Mm-hmm.
the first couple shows was just Vince, and I mean, we were every bit as excited. I mean, disappointed that Brent wasn't there, but there was a huge banner up in the second balcony area that said, welcome Vince, and all the Deadheads were super welcoming, and it was, yeah. So we were fully on board, and it was kind of cool because I was here all the differences in fans from the East Coast to the West Coast and the Midwest,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of considered myself somewhat lucky that not a ton of shows, but I got to see shows in every region. So you kind of got that different vibe in different places.
Right.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was cool. I had a really good friend of mine, Denise, and she had a great Volkswagen bus. So all of the shows I'm talking about now, she was kind of we had our little crew of 4 to 5 Deadheads, and we'd take her bus, and she was always very tolerant. Many of those trips, she was the only female, and with 3 or 4 guys. So she was, of course, very tolerant of us, and so yeah, it's nice to have good Deadhead friends, especially when they have a cool Volkswagen.
Yeah, no doubt. That's right in style when you roll in there.
Oh yeah,
I almost bought one of those. I test drove it, and it made me nervous, and so I didn't buy it. I don't know if
yeah,
that's standard with that vehicle or not, but this one seemed to be in good shape, but it still made me nervous, so I passed on it. But
yeah.
I wanted that thing so bad. It had the pop
I
up,
mean,
and
not being very handy mechanic wise, I'm glad we only had I think we had 2 or 3 flat tires, and that was it. So I mean, one of which was a kind of harrowing experience leaving the Philly Spectrum and having a flat tire in the middle of the night and still feeling the effects of the show. And that was kind of an acid test moment where, okay, I gotta power through this and survive this. And and a cop even pulled up
yeah.
and right behind me, and he turned his spotlight on me. So not only am I trying to muddle my way through changing this Volkswagen tire, which luckily they're tiny and very light, so it was easy to get on there, but you got a cop shining a spotlight on you the whole time. Not the audience I wanted at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, in that vehicle, you're sort of attracting some attention too.
That's for sure. Yeah, but he,
Yeah.
he was cool. He just, hey, he asked me if I needed help, and I said no, I think I got it, and and I jacked it up, changed the tire, and we got the heck out of there.
In some parts of the country, a flat tire and a VW is probable cause.
Man, I guess not in
Not that many.
Pennsylvania. That was, or maybe we just maybe that it was too late, and the cop didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, in Indiana, they're shaking you down if that's happened. So yeah, good
Oh,
for
really?
you. That's awesome. uh, all right, Paul, thank you for being on. And so to wrap up here,
Yeah,
give me
man.
some sort of recommendation, some movie or album, band you've seen,
Okay.
something that's really good. I've found that most Deadheads have pretty good taste in things. So
Dude, I have read two of the coolest books lately. Um, I don't know if you've heard of this one. It's Tiger in a Trance, and it's from
okay.
Max Luddington, and it was unbelievable. It was such a good. It's a Deadhead memoir. I read an interview with this guy after I read this book, and he said it seems very autobiographical. And this guy Max was seeing a lot of Dead shows from like I think it's that 84 to 90, so a little bit before us. Will, but it
Mhm.
just brought back so many memories and yeah, so I would recommend any Deadhead check out Tiger in a Trance if you want to just kind of bring back some really fun memories of like we've been talking about traveling around the country with your friends and the good and the bad. There's always some dicey things that can happen. So that's a good one. And then this one, Thomas Pynchon, Inherent Vice. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, Will, with Joaquin Phoenix. The movie's really cool, but this book is,
I don't think
as
so.
books often are, it's way better than the movie.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. It's kind of he's the main character is it's 1969 in Malibu, and he's just kind of a stoner private investigator, which in the movie is very well played by Joaquin Phoenix. It's a good
Yeah.
role for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Agreed.
just it's really it kind of brings back that early '70s vibe of Southern California and just all the hippies and the weird goings on. It's been a real page turner. So yeah, I would say
Awesome.
Tiger in a Trance and Inherent Vice are two really. I lucked into those recently because I think I've read a few clunkers recently too. So
It happens. It happens. I've
yeah,
I've been reading the
sure.
Miles Davis autobiography for a while, and I've really been trying to pace myself because I could really just like sit there and blaze through it, and I don't
Huh.
want it to end. And I'm down to like the last 30 pages now, so I'm reading it like 2 pages at a time.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Okay.
it is just so good. The stories he tells and the people he meets and it reminded me earlier you were talking about Bill Graham and he's got a Bill Graham story in there. He was playing at the Fillmore for a while and
Yeah.
East West doing stuff with Bill Graham, who he thought was a great dude and doing great things for music. And um, at one point he was booked to play the West and was going to open for Steve Miller. And he had some choice things to say about Steve Miller's ability to play a guitar uh, or write songs. I'm not going to go into great detail about that,
Sure.
but what
I hear you.
happened was it was 2 nights in a row, and he shows up late the first night, and so Bill forced Steve Miller to go on, and then Miles went on with his band, and it was a great success, and everything was awesome. The next night happens. Miles again is late, pulls up, and Bill is waiting outside for him in the parking lot, just fuming, like, "What are you doing? This is the second night in a row." And Miles's response says, "It was great last night, wasn't it?" And just walked away. And he said Bill just smiled and walked away also, and that was the end of it. So yeah, he had a pretty
Nice.
good relationship with. Yeah,
I,
so
I just
that's my
saw that book
recommendation.
actually. I'm gonna
It,
hit that one up. I just saw that. I think I saw it
yeah,
at the used bookstore just recently. So yeah, I'll have to go grab that.
yeah, get the autobiography one that,
Okay.
with. Yeah. There's the one he helped. He had a helper with it, but it's quality, man. It's good stuff. Really
Nice.
great stories. Yeah, he was an
Cool.
interesting fella.
I
Awesome.
bet.
All right, so Paul, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you coming on here and telling your great stories and sharing with us a lost time that we all had.
Oh man, it was a lot of fun, Will. I loved it. I loved it.
Indeed. Hey now, do you have a great story about a Grateful Dead show you were at? I'd love to hear it and maybe have you on the podcast. Send me an email at will@talesfromthelot.org and let me know what show you would like to talk about and what made it so special to you.